Hello, welcome to County Board Wrap-Up. I'm Diana Sun from the Office of Communications. With me here today is Mary Hynes, the County Board Chair. Welcome, Mary. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Diana.
Each month following the County Board meeting, we're taking a half hour to talk about some of the actions the board took and what those actions mean for you, your family, and our community. This month, we'll be discussing the Affordable Housing Master Plan, Courthouse Sector Plan, expansion of Abingdon Elementary School, the future of Reevesland Farm, Fire Station Number 8, and the proposed expansion of Virginia Hospital Center. As always, Mary Hynes will be here to help us understand it all, and we have a lot to cover today.
We do.
So let's get started. Let us start with the adoption of the Affordable Housing Master Plan, and that was a lot of work on the part of the community and the staff.
Absolutely.
Tell us, what is a master plan and why do we need it?
Well, you know, a master plan fits into, we have a comprehensive plan that we're required to have by the state, and the master plan fits in and said these are areas that we need to plan for that are essential to creating a vibrant community. And we didn't have any plan associated with housing. So since 2012, we've been working on this with a group, a citizen group that's done a lot of the work, and very intensely over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of conversation with the community. But people say, why do you need to plan for housing? Doesn't housing just happen? And the reality is that it doesn't. You know, back in 2000, we had 23,000 units that were affordable to people who make, and now I'm going to use a little geek speak here, 60% of area median income, which means for a family of four that they make about $65,000 a year, because our area median income's over 100. So folks who drive buses or are nurses' assistants or work in elder care.
The people who keep our communities going.
Exactly. That, a lot of folks make that kind of money. So we had 23,000 back in the year 2000 units affordable at that rate. Now we have less than 10. And so we've lost this enormous resource that allowed people who keep our community going to live in our community. And so the master plan says we want to get back up to where we were, close to 23,000 over the next about 25 years. But if we're not intentional about it, if we don't think about it as we plan and as we continue to redevelop our community, it won't happen. And that's why we need a plan.
It's an important priority in our community, therefore it needs to be part of the comprehensive plan.
Absolutely.
Now, part of what you talked about and adopted was an implementation framework.
We didn't adopt the implementation framework.
Excuse me.
We
so yes, explain that.
So the implementation framework is really staff's best thinking today of the tools and the strategies that we should use to accomplish the plan. How we're going to accomplish these goals and priorities that we've laid out in our plan. And one of the things we know is that over time those strategies can change. But the board basically pulled up 5 big ideas out of that implementation framework and said to the manager, we want you to do these first. So the first one is monitoring how we're doing every year on achieving what we said we were going to do.
Because if we measure it, then
it matters, exactly. The second is to look at our Affordable Housing Investment Fund, which is a loan fund that we use to make bricks and mortar investments, and think about whether we need to adjust some of the ways people apply for those funds and we give out those funds in order to achieve affordable housing in places we currently don't have it. That makes sense, per the plan. The third one is to look at some zoning ordinance proposals, one around accessory dwellings, which are smaller units within a larger unit. So if you have a big basement, you might think of putting an apartment in your basement under certain kinds of...
So what we used to call an English basement.
Exactly, yeah. But you could also put it on your second floor, depending, right? So it's just a small unit in your other one. Looking at some land use tools that we might use to take our idea of transit-oriented development and think about other transit corridors that have good bus service and how those might redevelop in a way that would give us a mix of affordability. And then finally looking at places we currently have market rate affordable and thinking how we might strategize with those owners to hold on to some of that. So those are 3 big ideas. We're also going to look at affordable condominiums and finally at our real estate tax relief.
You know, you mentioned where there was some concerns expressed about the geographic distribution of affordable housing. Can you address that?
Sure. The plan, you know, what we've been doing since 2000 is we've been looking at where we have market rate affordable housing, and we've been working with landowners and nonprofits to try to preserve as much of that and or expand it where it makes sense, because there's a lot of land or you can go higher. This plan continues that as a strategy, but then its next strategy is let's look at good transportation corridors, and let's think about what kind of density, what kinds of forms will give us mixed income housing in those transportation corridors. And then finally, the third little piece of distribution is, you know, 80% of our land is zoned single family. But if we go to this idea of people could have a unit in their basement or duplexes or some other arrangements where it makes sense, where it doesn't violate neighborhood character, then we can also have a different conversation about how single family could potentially help contribute to meeting this need for those people who make our community
Right,
go.
and that could be a win-win.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to the Courthouse Sector Plan. The board voted unanimously to adopt a major update to the plan. Why the update?
Well, this update really focuses on Courthouse Square and the buildings that surround Courthouse Square, right here. And a lot of people don't know the building that the county board is in right now is a rental building. We don't actually own it. And it's been a long-held desire, dream, whatever, that we would have a courthouse building that we owned. And so we planned the area basically on 3 sides of the big parking lot, which in our dream, in our vision, becomes a huge central square, and the parking goes underground. So we didn't replan the whole courthouse, but we said, you know, let's have a modernized vision of how we want our government center to function for people.
It would be great to have a big gathering,
wouldn't it?
Square, you know, public place. When might we see all this?
Well, again, we told the manager to prioritize some things, and a big question is how can we advance getting that underground garage? Most of the property around the square is owned by the county. There's not a lot of redevelopment, private redevelopment that might contribute, although there's some. And so I hope that as we move into next year's capital plan, that staff will give some thought to how we might advance that parking, because once the parking is there, then you can do the square. And once the parking is there, some of the other redevelopment gets easier because you have a place to put cars while you're doing the building. So that's the big get, is that square and the underground parking.
So the funding isn't
Not decided. And the board will have to be creative, quite honestly. But we've been talking about this for 20 years, and the parking lot is the stumbling block. And so if we can't figure out how to advance the parking in order to get the square, I think we'll be sitting here talking about it 30 years from now, too.
Well, we do have a lot of smart people.
Yes, we do.
So I'm sure we can figure it out.
I think so, too.
Okay. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the future of Fire Station 8 and the decision to divide Reeves Land in Bluemont Park.
I think we just need to look at affordable housing being across the spectrum. I think in our business, in the real estate business, I often talk about it as workforce housing. So we need it at every strata.
Service workers or clerical folks, having those folks live close to their jobs is better for the employers. It cuts down on transportation time. So we think in that way it helps the economy as well.
These people that are school teachers and work at the fire department or police department or simply going to graduate school and have one income, they should be afforded the same opportunities to live in places like this.
Do you know where you can plan your family's next picnic and nature walk? Travel back in time without leaving your chair? Or maybe take a tour of Arlington County's public art, even when it's raining? Well, here at Arlington County's GIS Mapping Center, we can help you do all of this and more from your desktop computer or mobile device. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, and we gather and analyze data to create maps, charts, and 3D models of the world around you. Whether it's planning a safe route to school for your child or planning a bike route on over 100 miles of trails, we've got you covered. And if you need a bike, we can show you where all the Capital Bike Share stations are, repair stations, and restrooms for your next adventure on wheels. Finding the nearest police station, fire hydrant, bus stop, or voting station couldn't be easier thanks to Arlington County's GIS Mapping Center. Our team supports Arlington's residents, county government, and other organizations. We provide aerial photo analysis, data maintenance, digitizing support, and much more. Providing these tools empowers you to make better informed decisions about your work, life, and recreation in the county. See what GIS is doing for Arlington and see what it can do for you. Visit maps.arlingtonva.us and get started.
Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up. Mary, the County Board this meeting accepted the County Manager's recommendation to establish a task force to help with the siting of the future Fire Station number 8. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. We started this spring to have a conversation with the community about locations north of Lee Highway that would work to improve response time for EMS and fire. Fire Station 8 is the one right across from the Heidelberg Bakery on Lee Highway.
Yes.
And it's kind of close to the Cherrydale Fire Station, and we've thought for a very long time that if we could move it further north, it could be better. So the community came together. We had 3 or 4 meetings. A number of sites were suggested. Some initial work was done. And the manager has basically said he thinks the time is now to put this into a more formalized process.
When do you anticipate creating this task force and naming the members, and who are you going to appoint?
Well, I don't know yet who we're going to appoint. The first step will be that we're going to have a work session on October 8th with the county manager and his staff, talking to the board for us to kind of get all of us up to speed on what they learned over these last several months about sites, about response times, about a lot of different things that they've been studying. We'll also, I believe, have a straw man on what the charge might be to the group. And oh, by the way, Diana, Open Arlington's got a set of questions right now that people can look at until we get to probably the 10th or the 12th of the month and give us their feedback on the criteria we've been using as well as other criteria they think we ought to take a look at. But we'll get together on October 8th with the manager with this draft of the charge. It's my hope that the board will adopt it October 21st at our carryover meeting. It may take us another little while to find the right members. The board really hasn't had any conversation about that, but we know we need a fairly broad-based group because, you know, fire stations are part of a network and you can't just move one randomly without understanding the impacts on the rest of
They
them.
serve our whole community.
Absolutely, yeah.
How long do you anticipate the task force being at work?
Well, the manager has suggested that their work would conclude in March of next year in order to fit into the capital improvement program process. And here's the other piece of the puzzle. So we need to replace the salt dome, which is up there near Marymount. It's falling apart. That's funded. We own 7 acres up there, and that's one of the key locations that the task force will be looking at for potentially housing a new fire station. We can't master plan to figure out the salt dome, the leaf pile, and whether there's a fire station or not till we know what the board's decision is on the fire station. So we're holding up a lot of work in order to try to make the right decision.
This is all connected.
All connected
yes.
and funded, and important, all of it, to make sure that we don't just have those salt and mulch services only on the south side of the county.
And these are important community services.
Absolutely, yeah.
The recommendation, the task force will come up with its recommendations,
Right.
and will that be binding on the board, or how will
You know,
that
the
work?
board always reserves to itself the capacity to balance out what it hears. I hope we put together a group that is thoughtful and has some tension about the answers, so, because I've found when we have tension about the answer in the group that there's a lot of energy put into trying to find something that is satisfying to most people. So hopefully that's what will happen, and the recommendation that comes through will be one the board will accept, but we never promise in advance.
Let's move on to talk about Reeves Land. So this is a historic property. It's right next to Bluemont Park, and it was the site of Arlington's last dairy farm. There is an old farmhouse on the property. There's a park. There's a sledding slope that is much beloved. Tell us, the board voted to split Reeves Land, and can you explain to us about that?
Sure. We've owned Reeves Land for about 15 years, and in that time the house is very historic. It's also small. It's only about 1,000 square feet. And so it really doesn't lend itself to public use like we would.
Like a museum or something?
Well, and we don't really have museums, but even the kind of community house that we might say that you have in Barcroft or in Lyon Park, it's too small, it's too cut up. And we've been trying to figure out what we really want to preserve is that whole feeling of the farmhouse on the hill and the land falling down, and we've got, Reeves Land Learning Center gardening. So we did what's called a Unified Residential Development Division in order to give ourselves some flexibility to potentially sell the farmhouse to an individual who would be required to live in it and required to respect its historicity. The parcel would not allow any other homes to be built. Now the board voted to do this, I think 4-1. We have 3 years to record that action of the board. In the meantime, we have a very interesting community group that's kind of risen that has an idea about how this building could in fact be used in a different manner. And we're giving them a little bit of time to sort of work through their ideas. But we committed that if we did decide to record the URD, the manager would come back to the board and the board would take that action in public.
So you've taken the action to divide it, but it doesn't sound like a sale is imminent.
No, we haven't put it on the market. We haven't recorded the notes on the deeds. The other part of the action actually will lock the whole rest of the parcel in as a park. So that's another thing people have been worried about. Are you going to sell off land, lots for other kinds of building? And that is not the board's intention. It's to preserve the one historic house and keep the rest of it as a park.
So are there plans to develop that park, or what are the plans there?
As a park, they're back behind the property, up at the very top of the hill and behind the house is the old milk shed from the dairy farm. Right now that's very difficult to get to. So I think the long range thinking about the park is that there would be some kind of an accessible path that would take you along the edge and get you up to the top. We have a great partnership with the Reeves Land Learning Center, who's got raised beds there and are growing all kinds of different things with kids, and we think that's terrific and a lovely use. Mr. Reeves had a huge garden, so
carrying on that
tradition. So we've been partnering with them for a couple of years. So yeah, I think potentially there could be. I think the language would allow a gazebo or a small picnic shelter or a space that could be covered if the gardeners or others wanted to get out of that.
So it really sounds like the vision there is to maintain the historic nature and character.
Absolutely, and I think, regardless of which way board members have voted on whether to do the URD or not, every single board member is committed to preserving this as a place where you can come to understand some of the history. And it may be that the best way ultimately to preserve the house is to sell it to someone who will take care of it appropriately.
And who's able to,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll discuss the proposed expansions of Abingdon Elementary School and the Virginia Hospital Center.
You won't need to feed the meter when parking in Arlington. Now, you can pay by cell thanks to the Park Mobile app and park at any metered space throughout the county. It's easy to get started. Download the app from the Apple or Android store. Then, sign up for your free account. You'll need your license plate number and a credit card. Launch the app when you park at a meter. Key in the zone number listed on the Park Mobile sign, or use the GPS functionality. Select the amount of time you want to park and hit start. That's it. The app allows you to get text messages showing you when your time is about to expire, and you can add more time within the posted duration from anywhere. There's even a Find Your Car function in case you forgot where you parked. Arlington's Park Mobile app is the same as DC, so if you use it in the district, you're covered. Park Mobile's Pay by Cell app is available for iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry smartphones. For more information about Pay by Cell and where it's available, visit arlingtonva.us and search Park Mobile.
We're back, continuing our discussion of September's Marathon County Board meeting with our guest, current Board Chair Mary Hynes. the board approved an expansion plan for Abingdon Elementary School. Mary, tell us, why does Abington need an expansion?
Oh my goodness. Well, you kind of have to have your head in the sand to not understand how many more kids APS has added in the last 5 years.
I see them on the street.
Yes,
in the
they're
strollers.
everywhere. They're everywhere, and it's a good thing because
Yes.
having more children in our community is really a wonderful opportunity to invest in the future and all. So Abingdon already had a bunch of trailers. Abingdon was an older building, is an older building where the systems are beginning to fail. So the school system really elevated it and said, we're going to put going to move some stuff around. Basically, they're getting up to an extra 135 kids from what they have now. I think they'll be close to 700 when all is said and done. And so it's redoing all the systems, managing the stormwater better. They've moved the gym from the back of the school to the front of the school so that we have better community access, improved playgrounds in the back, preservation of what is one of the nicest walking tracks around, and an open field that the Abingdon-Fairlington community really uses tremendously. But basically, it was its turn and its time for that to be redone.
Now, you're a former school board
I
chair, so
am.
I know you're familiar with these issues.
I was there for the last edition, actually.
Can you maybe tell us how the county is helping the schools cope with this expanding enrollment?
Sure. You know, we've been working pretty carefully together through the last capital improvement programs to make sure that we're trying to move as much in lockstep together as we can. They are looking now to site another school on the south side and potentially 2 new schools on the south side, and there's a group of citizens.
There's a planning effort
that
going on,
the school
yes.
system is, they call it the South Arlington Working Group, and they're supposed to come in October. We also last year identified a couple of locations where we believe we have room in buildings we have that have gymnasiums and spaces that could be used for cafeteria that the schools could use on an interim basis as we're waiting for permanent spaces to be built. And the Carver Rec Center, which is adjacent to Hoffman Boston School, and there's a little bit of space at Drew in the rec center, and Madison Community Center also has some space. So we've made those available to schools and said if you're interested in, and the fourth one is the Fenwick building, which is next to the Columbia Pike Library.
Yes.
We've said if you guys want to use these, let's have a conversation, and I think it's possible next fall that some of those will be put into use as we continue to work through.
That sounds like some very creative thinking.
Yeah. Well, you know, I will say when I was on the school board the last time was the last time we had a big bump up. And we did some very unusual things, including moving a piece of Key Elementary School, which is right here in Courthouse, out to Westover, and we called it Key West. And
That's very
expanded the immersion program, and we also had Oak Ridge sharing with the Hoffman Boston building at the Carver Center. That was 15, 20 years ago. So we've partnered before, and we'll probably end up partnering again. But we can make this work better for everyone.
So it sounds like a lot of expansion of schools and more schools and building. And how are we paying for all this?
Well, we do it mostly with bonds. A little bit with our annual pay-go money goes into fixing sidewalks and intersections and things like that. But the voters basically have been approving bonds to support school construction for since the late 80s. We've had a pretty, we've had an unbroken string of bond approvals to support the school system expansion.
So a growing community is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a healthy community.
Yep.
And speaking of growing community, at your last meeting, the board authorized the manager to sign a non-binding letter of intent with the Virginia Hospital Center with an option to purchase some county land, about 5 acres, I believe, right next to the hospital. What is happening there? Is the land sale a done deal?
Well, the letter of intent is really that. We intend to move forward, but we have to get to what's called an option agreement where all of the details about how such a land transaction would happen would be worked out by the various lawyers, Virginia Hospital Centers and ours. And you're right, it's this 5.5 acres that's just north of the hospital. We have 4 or 5 buildings, and we've been in the process of emptying all but one of those out and moving them down to the Stambaugh Center, which is at Washington Boulevard and Route 50. So that's the right place for the hospital to expand. Now, what's really interesting to me in the world of we've talking about land and how scarce land is, and the hospital owns some other parcels in the county that they have indicated a willingness to put on the table. So we might get cash, we might get only land, we might get a combination.
Some combination.
And a lot of it will depend, and the value of what the county ultimately ends up with will be not only the value of the land, but what is it that the hospital wants to build on that land, because all the density there is going to have to be created by the county board. It's zoned as a public place with no density. So we'll be in a conversation probably, I would guess, at least through 2016 and maybe a little into 2017 before it's known. But the hospital's got these couple of parcels that could really help us meet some other needs, and we'll again have to work with the community to figure out what the best choices are.
How will we determine the value of that 5 acres?
Well, it'll be based on an assessment, of the value of the property. And so we know what the base value is today of that property, but when the county board does a rezoning and a reglup, and all of which adds value to what the people can do on the property, it makes the property more valuable. And so that's why we can't say today what the value will be, and I'm fairly certain it won't be an acre for acre swap if we ended up doing only land. But that's all to come, and the option agreement will lay out the process. So this is the beginning. This is absolutely the beginning. What's been great is the hospital has worked really well with their neighbors, and so the 3 civic associations are supportive of moving this process forward, and they have about 6 acres or so on 2 different corners on Lee Highway and George Mason, and then they have the old Doctor's Hospital on Carlin Spring, which is almost 12 acres of land.
So I just want to point out to our viewers, you had mentioned a reglupping.
Yeah.
So I just want to...
General land use plan, which basically it lays out our intention for the kinds of uses that would be allowed in places. So when we change that general land use plan, there's a cost to that in terms of value, an increase in the value of the property generally that's being.
And that general land use plan has brought us to where we are.
Absolutely, very important foundational document.
When do you think we might actually see a new expanded hospital?
Well, they have a bit of a process they have to go through, Diana. They have to get what's called a certificate of public need from the state that basically says how many more beds they can add and what kinds of specialty equipment. And so when they have the letter of intent, they can go and say, okay, we think we're going to have a deal, and can you tell us now what our certificate of public need would allow? And then that lets them begin the master planning of the site, similar to what any developer would do, which then has to come back to the board for all of the various board's actions.
We're at the beginning.
We're at the beginning. We challenged staff a little bit as to whether or not they could bring us the option agreement by the end of the year. Because the hospital's anxious to get moving. They're running out of beds. I think they told us 85 days last year they were totally maxed out.
They're serving a growing community.
Absolutely, and the births are going, through the ceiling, and it really is time for them to expand.
Well, thank you so much for being with us
You're welcome.
again here today and explaining all that went on in that
24 hours that we sat in those chairs.
in that long board meeting. And thank you all once again for joining us for County Board Wrap Up. We'll see you in October.